Alright you guys, this is part 3 of the 3-part Q&A that I told you guys I was going to do. As always, there was a lot of good questions, but I want to start incorporating the Q&A into our weekly projects from now on. So get your questions in and keep them coming. Also, just a quick heads up. Before I start doing lives, we're going to be putting together a members only club where I'm going to start doing lives first with members only. Then I'll gradually transition over into an open format. But don't worry, I'm not going to be another one of those channels that oversaturates you with content every day about everything from every gang on the planet to different ways of stroking my ego. It'll be simple, it'll be toned down and consistent with the content we've been dropping. So without further ado, let's get to the Q&A. So Chili Pinto wants to know, there's a vato from Orange County who goes by the YouTube handle of OG Black speaking on cartels and M business, yet he swears he's solid and has never snitched. I'm not sure who you're talking about, however, I only know of one individual who fits that description. I'm not even going to mention his name though, because I don't want him to get all butthurt. But give me some more details just so I know who you're talking about. These are the kind of individuals I was referring to in my last Q&A who go on YouTube and drop all this content about prison gangs, profiles, and all these criminal organizations, but yet they fail to see it for what it is. It's telling, giving up the blueprints. Come on, man. It is what it is. These cats know this too, but this is how they justify what they're doing while they sit back pointing fingers at everybody else. It's comical, man. So Harpo165 wants to know, what do you think about the boxing match between Gunner and Cholo Trucker? Are you going to watch it, and who are you riding with? Also, who's your favorite boxer of all time? And if you could pick 2 boxers and emulate their styles, who would it be and why? You guys are wrong. You really are trying to instigate, huh? And as much as I want to take the bait and let these things fly, I'm just not going to do it. But I will say this. I'm not just a boxer, but I'm also a boxing fan. I used to watch boxing when boxing was really boxing. Remember back in the days when ESPN had Top Rank Boxing and they used to showcase fighters like Donald Curry, John the Beast Mugabe, Alexis Arguello, Ray Boom Boom Mancini, Hector Macho Camacho, Aaron Pryor, Tommy Hitman Hearns, Wilfredo Benitez, Sugar Ray Leonard, etc., etc. I mean, the list goes on and on. As far as my favorite boxer, I've got a few, but if I had to pick, I'd have to say my boy Mike Tyson was my favorite. Pound for pound, nobody could touch Mike when he was in his prime. Emulate, I take Mike's overall style with Floyd Mayweather's footwork and his ability to slip punches. If you could find somebody like that and put those 2 styles together, he'd be unstoppable. It'd almost be unfair. With regards to what I think about this upcoming event, not much. Who am I riding with? Nobody. I'm staying out of it. I'm not going to comment on it. Not going to say nothing about it. I've spoke before and it was misconstrued. So I don't care. Don't want to know. I'm not involved in it. Period. As far as whether or not I'm going to order it or watch it for $35, that's not going to happen. If it was free, maybe. I barely paid $35, $40 to watch a Mike Tyson fight. And I liked him. So me paying to watch some YouTube event just ain't in the cards for me. And that's not hating, man. That's just keeping it real. Alexander M wants to know, does the power of the NF on the streets today carry weight like it used to? If so, what cities do you think they have a lot of control over? Also, New Mexico, Colorado have NF members as well as Washington. I think the power and the influence of the NF is still prevalent and it's still out there in certain areas, but it's nothing like it used to be. These last 20 years have decimated the NF's power and influence, and nobody can deny this. From law enforcement pressure to state and federal indictments to a lot of members defecting, all this has contributed to a consistent decline that's continued to happen over these last 20 years. The NF's own failure to pursue known defectors, dropouts, and those who have openly betrayed the organization has also hurt the NF's influence and fear that it once commanded on the streets as well. In the early to mid 80s, people feared the NF. People spoke about the NF like it was a powerful organization, and it was feared because bodies were still being dropped on the streets. I mean, the NF hasn't really been in the public spotlight since Operation Black Widow. Before that, what was it? The Brown Bob homicide. It's almost like it's been in hibernation mode for the past 2 decades now. But the NF's image hasn't been conquered, it can still recoup the reverence and admiration that it once commanded. All it would take is for some high profile examples to be made, and for the street regiments to go on a good 2-year house cleaning expedition. That would reignite the fear that's been missing and would send the type of message that the NF hasn't been sending. That would do it right there. That's just the reality of it. The NF has to start dropping bodies like it used to be known for. Once it starts doing that, then people will start fearing it again. Keeping it real, there's just too many dropouts and people walking the streets that turned against the NF and who have turned state's evidence. That never would have been allowed in the 80s and 90s. As far as the cities they still maintain control over, well, they obviously still control all the cities in Northern California. But the ones with more influence are definitely cities like Salinas, San Jose, Santa Rosa, Sacramento, Stockton, Visalia, Tulare County, Gilroy, and Modesto. Mainly the bigger cities. There's a lot of the smaller cities too, like Watsonville, Hollister, Greenfield, Gonzales, and some others. But these are some of the main ones that I can think of off the top of my head. So CG wants to know, what would be your advice for a white dude from the Bay Area going to prison who grew up with nothing but black and Hispanic partners? You know, from Frisco, or you're from Frisco, so you know what I mean. He might run into a black or a Latin friend in there he knew since birth. How would you advise him to rock on the inside as far as race politics? Well, I've seen this happen a lot with guys who grew up in the city. With so much diversity, it's to be expected. My advice to him would be to identify with who he connected with the most and to commit to them as his people. Simple as that. If it's the blacks, then roll with them. If it's the Hispanics, then roll with them. If it's the whites, then he's got to roll with them. Either way it goes, he has to be sure about who it is that he thinks he identifies with. He can't be wishy-washy about it or indecisive about it either. He has to make a decision one way or the other. He can't walk the line, play both sides, or be unsure about it either, because trust me, this is only going to cause him more grief behind the walls. He's in a tough spot for sure. If he chooses to run with the white guys just based on the color of his skin, he's going to get around them and find out that he doesn't have nothing in common with them. Different mentality, they don't even walk or talk the same. I have no vested interest in this one way or the other. I'm only giving you my advice because you asked for it. But I will say this. If he chooses to ride with the blacks, this could be a hard road to travel and he might get challenged a lot more. Other white inmates will take up issue with this as they don't like to see a white guy break race lines and ride with the blacks. That's just the way it is. But I tell him not to base it on that either. Fuck what they think. I tell him to just base it on where his heart's at, period. If he feels like the blacks are his people, then that's who he identifies with, then ride with them and do it with pride. Just be ready to deal with some of the politics that come with it. He's going to have to deal with white dudes always mean mugging him, always trying to push up on him. He's always going to be exposed to that tension and the fallout that comes with it. I'm sure other people would say that this would be the less than favorable choice. But again, he's got to base it on where his heart's at. It's a common occurrence to see white guys riding with Hispanics all the time, as a lot of them come up and are raised in their neighborhoods. The politics are different with regards to these three groups as well. This is something that I also tell him to become familiar with. But again, the ultimate choice should only be based on where his heart's at. So Lennon Reyes wants to know, do people in the O understand they're being used like puppets, used as cannon fodder? How does one internalize that once the fact creeps in? Is fear a powerful tool? What keeps the majority in check and deters any sort of pushback? That's a good question. I'd say they don't initially know, of course not. If they did, they'd be idiots to continue to sign up for it. What happens is they're exposed to a meticulous brainwashing system, and this is systematically instilled until they buy into the NF's philosophy and agenda. Once they realize that they're just mere pawns in the game of prison politics and that they've been primed up to be controlled by the puppet masters, it's too late. By this time, they're in neck deep, they're committed, and they're beyond the point of no return. As far as how one internalizes it, I guess that just depends on the individual, right? Everyone internalizes different. Some people jump ship once they realize that that's not the lifestyle for them and that there's just no future in being pushed and pulled like that. Others come to see it for what it is, but just continue pushing that line because they can't bring themselves to go out like that. They continue to live in a state of perpetual denial until they either come to that dead-end street at the end of the road or until politics swallow them up in the end. Fear is a powerful tool, but it doesn't always work. I guess this is what stops the majority of pushback. Once this revelation comes about and the blinders come off, they still know that pushback without justification will only get them whacked. So Kenny Vigil wants to know, I was just watching Red, don't know how to spell his name in Spanish, but he said he don't talk about you on his channel, then said he was asked not to. I felt I was being respectful, but he felt I wasn't. Can you give us some insight on this? To me, I feel like your education is far more advanced than all three of them. Well, I appreciate that part of what you said. As far as what you were told about him being asked not to speak on my name, that's correct. I asked both him and Flacco not to involve me or mention my name in some of the content and material that they were putting out because I didn't agree with it. I felt like if my name was mentioned, people were gonna assume I was putting my stamp on it. So that was the best way to deal with it. So Seamus Donahue wants to know, I've heard your version of the garden shear fence cutting story at San Quentin circa 2000. However, I've heard another version that involved the woods, specifically Kobe Phillips. Is this the case of same story, different characters, or were there multiple garden shear fence cutting? I'm not sure what the first version entailed, but the second version sounded spot on. This is what happened. At the time this incident kicked off, I thought I had a good rapport with the Woods that were there in AdSeg with me, and I assumed I had a mutual agreement with them. This was when the AdSeg yards, the 5 and 6 yards, were behind East Block in the back with the death row yards. At the time, there was a couple Woods that were on yard 5 that I knew, and we had an open line of communication. This was the thing. Our yard, which was the Northern Mexican black yard, was on the 6 yard. Their yard next to us, the 5 yard, was the Southern Mexican white yard. So our yards were right next to each other, and we used to share an enclosure that was basically an entrance to both yards. You following me? So I tried to find a picture, but the ones you see are the closest I could find. When you walked into this enclosure, like these two pics to the right, or the one to the right, the officer would close the gate behind you, and then he'd take your cuffs off. Then you'd stand there and you'd wait for the officer to open up another gate depending on what yard you were assigned to. Either the yard gate to the right, which was yard 5, or the yard gate to the left, which was yard 6. The gate was controlled electronically, and sometimes the officer would make a mistake and let the inmate out to the wrong yard. So to confuse the officer or to encourage him to open the wrong gate, I implemented a policy for all Northerners to turn towards the 5 yard gate instead of turning towards our gate. During yard release, both yards used to have 4 or 5 guys that would post up on the perimeter line, just in case a mistake was ever made and the opposition was let out to the wrong yard. On our yard was 2 Northerners and 2 blacks. On their yard was 2 Southerners and 2 whites. The agreement I had with the white boys at the time was, I told them that if a mistake was ever made and a Northerner was ever let out to their yard by accident, that they were to tell their people to step back and let us handle our business with the Southerners. And vice versa. If a white boy was ever to get cut out to our yard, that I'd have my people take a step back and let them handle their business with the blacks. That's just the way it was, because at the time we weren't in war with them. Well, this agreement was being honored until one day they made a mistake and let a Northerner, a guy named Tuna from Hayward, out to their yard. The individual that you mentioned, Kobe Phillips, a white guy, he was keeping security on the gate when it happened and rushed the Northerner with the other 2 Southerners and the other white boy that was keeping security on the gate. So after that yard, I went back into the building, sent out directives to the main line and to the reception center, basically to hit all white boys from Coco County because that's where Kobe Phillips was from. Long story short, the Northerners applied the green light to all white boys and slaughtered them dudes out there in the reception center and on the main line. Like I said, the directive was only intended to be the white boys from Coco County, but they applied it across the board. The green light stayed in effect for about a week, maybe 2 weeks, and a total of 71 slashings were recorded in that time. It got so bad that they were flying dudes out in a helicopter. Eventually, I called the green light off after talking with the white boys in ADSEC, the ones that I initially had this agreement with. And they basically told me that Kobe claimed that him and his boy didn't know about our agreement, which I didn't buy that at all. If he was gonna be keeping security on the gate, that seemed like it would have been something that would have definitely been it would have been imperative for them to have mentioned that to them if they were gonna put them two dudes on the gate. Oh, by the way, we got an agreement with these dudes, man. If they ever let a Northerner out, just step back and let them handle their business with the Southerners. And but that wasn't respected. Anyway, that's what ended up happening right there, and that's the true and correct version. So Faith and Hope wants to know, do you miss that lifestyle? I know for a fact they did you wrong. Glad to see you move on. Keep it that way. A true soldier seen it all. Would you go back into it? It's not so much the lifestyle that I miss, it's some of the people from the lifestyle that I miss. People that I had tight bonds with and people who I had gotten real close to. As far as going backwards and getting back into it, not a chance. That would be a downgrade, especially after knowing what I know now and after having been through some of the things that I have. I'm in a better place. I'm in a better place mentally, spiritually, emotionally, and financially. And I'm not walking the line where I have to worry about my door getting kicked in and losing everything I have because it was attained through criminal activity. They can't take nothing from me. So in retrospect, I look back on everything I've been through as learning experiences, phases I went through in life, and things I had to go through in order to make me the person that I am today. And yes, I definitely experienced one of the dirtiest forms of betrayal one can experience after devoting almost 35 years of my life to that lifestyle. But I don't waste time dwelling on that anymore. It's all in the past. So Don Miguel Gonzalez wants to know, regarding the 3 NF members who ended up on death row, why the negative pushback from the organization when you were trying to help them out? That's a good question. One I don't have the answer to. That's something I never understood either. It's not like they were ever in trouble or did anything that would have justified not giving them their own regiment, so I could never understand leadership's position on this. Maybe it was greed, or maybe they felt like giving them a regiment would have created future problems, but this doesn't even make sense. Because when I was pushing for these brothers to be given authorization to establish their own regiment, I was very specific about what it would entail, and that it would have remained limited to just a few individuals. I made it clear that they weren't going to build, they weren't going to expand, that it was only going to consist of 2 or 3 C's who were going to work solely for these brothers on death row, and that was it. The whole purpose for it was just so that these guys could become self-sustaining and self-supportive. That was it. Their personal resources had basically dried up and they were left to fend for themselves. So I was just trying to get them some help. That's what I was trying to do. I just kept getting shot down and there was never an explanation as to why. I started feeling guilty about it myself because I started to think that they might be thinking that I wasn't really pushing for them, or that, I was taking a lackadaisical approach about it, which I wasn't. I was pushing hard to the point where they kept on saying, stop bringing it up. The answer is no. So I couldn't understand it. These brothers made the ultimate sacrifice and gave their lives for this organization, only to be turned on in the end. I wish I could provide you with more insight on this, but I just don't have it. Maybe something happened that I don't know about. Maybe they had their reasons, but even if they did, I personally don't think it would justify leaving them to fend for themselves for all them years like they did. So Ivan Escobar wants to know, Well, he says, I have a question. The prison pictures are taken by the administration. And what's the purpose for them? And do prisoners get any of these pictures? I'm confused. What prison pictures are you talking about? Are you referring to pictures like the one that I have inserted on the right? I have to assume so because I don't know what other pictures you could be talking about. These pictures were actually taken by the inmates, not the administration. So, when they allowed you to go to canteen in prison to buy personal things like cosmetics, soup, stationery, coffee, pastries, candy, and other items, you were also allowed to purchase photo ducats on the canteen. The photo ducat was like a small card that authorized you to take one picture. So this is how it worked. When you went out to the exercise yard, the yard officer would give us a Polaroid camera and the hair clippers. There would be so many pictures in the camera, so we had to account for each picture taken with the ducat. Anyone on the yard could take the picture for you. That's pretty much it. You put your best pair of dancing shoes on, struck a pose, and you took your picture. At the end of the yard, you had to have an officer sign the back of your picture to make sure it wasn't of nothing they didn't allow, and then you were allowed to send it home in a letter. But all good things eventually come to an end. I believe they stopped allowing us to take pics in ad segs sometime around the late 90s as some idiot attempted to take a hot dog pic of himself and his little shriveled up mushroom. Because of this one idiot, they shut down the photo taking program for all ad seg inmates. I believe it was somewhere around 98 or 99. So 187 for you wants to know, can you give some background on the group picture you showed in your last Q&A? Can you also identify everyone in that picture with you? I've done this before, but I guess it's been a while. So this picture was taken in 1996 in the Adjustment Center, the AC in San Quentin. This picture was taken right before that clown Jimmy character Palma was killed. In fact, the yard we took this picture on is the yard he was killed on. Up until the late 90s, sometime close to the millennium, they used to allow some ADSEG inmates to go to the AC and program with grade B condemned death row inmates. Back row, standing from left to right. Crow from Castroville, Boxer from San Fran, Chopo from Watsonville, Smiley from San Jose, Payaso from Soledad, Casper from San Jose, and Smiley from Richmond. Bottom row, kneeling down from left to right. Gangster from San Jose, Shorty from San Fran, Little Man from Salinas, Mikeo from Salinas, and Fly from Soledad. That's basically everybody that's in the picture. So Richie Rich wants to know, how come the M or the Sureños didn't make a move on these 3,000 boys? I'm sure they jammed up Sureños along the way. Damn, hearing you tell this makes me want to go squat and lift iron to go out to street combat with these 3,000 boys. The MA and the Sureños did take a stand against these cats. I mentioned one instance in the Tunerville story, and when they boarded up, refused to come out of their cells and forced cell extractions on several occasions. There were other incidents that took place where deputies were also assaulted. So it wasn't like they were just sitting back and accepting these fools to run around unchecked. You know as well as I do that the M and the Sureños have never been ones to allow themselves to be abused or pushed up on without there being some type of consequences. So Polo Playa 916 wants to know, where can we get the background song? What's it called? It's called Spookster by Wayne Jones. Okay, you guys, this concludes the last part of this 3-part Q&A. But again, as long as you guys continue to submit your questions, I'll keep doing these Q&As. I want to try to incorporate them at least once a week, like I said earlier. So get your questions in ASAP. Also, with regard to Thief on the Cross, well, I already addressed that earlier in the community section. So it is what it is, man. If anyone has any ideas for the next book, drop your suggestions. I was considering Blood in the Fields, but I'm open for suggestions, so let me know what you guys think.